Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 116. We've got one of my favorite people from the baseball world, a guy who trained with us during his career. He's recently retired and doing some really cool stuff. Awesome wisdom with respect to his playing career, the injuries that he dealt with, how he overcame them, how he evolved as a pitcher over the course of that career. As well as just, the lessons that he learned on everything from the mental side of games to changing pitch selection over the course of a career, how he attacks his slider, talks about some of the great teammates he's had. Just a really good collection of information that I think is outstanding. And above all else, it's a great lesson for parents and kids who may need to take a more non-traditional path to college recruiting and getting to that next level. So this is a really good one with a guy I think the world of, and I think he'll have some great insights to share, everybody. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. 1 scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients through the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY. Today's guest was born in Tennessee and played middle infield in high school baseball, but transitioned to pitching sidearm when he got to Young Harris Junior College. He then transferred to Mercer University before his junior season. During the summer of 2006, he pitched in the Cape Cod Baseball League and was named an All-Star after recording 41 strikeouts in 29 innings. The Atlanta Braves drafted him in the 4th round of the 2007 MLB draft, and he made his major league debut in 2011. He pitched in the big leagues from 2011 to 2020, with time with the Braves, Giants, A's, Rangers, Mariners, Yankees, and Twins. He finished with 337 career appearances and a 3.61 career ERA. Please welcome to the show, Cory Gearrin. Cory, thanks so much for doing this, man. I'm really excited to talk to you.
I'm pumped to be here. I've been actually keeping up with the podcast for a long time, been waiting for my opportunity to get on. pumped to get to be on here after seeing C-Shack and all the guys.
You're in very good company, man. A lot of old training partners and teammates in the mix, right?
Absolutely.
Nice. So that actually kind of segues. So I was joking off air before we started. You are far and away one of the best, most compelling storytellers I think I've trained in my career in baseball strength and conditioning. And the specific ones, the instances I remember are like Night with the Pros, where you talked to a collection of like high school parents and kids and middle schoolers. And then there was a summer when I think it was when you were the Rangers, when you were in town to play at Fenway, and you came out and spoke to a bunch of our college guys. Always like super articulate. And there's no story that probably better illustrates it than the story of kind of how you got to where you were in college baseball. So maybe that's a good place to start. Describe Cory Gearrin as a high school athlete and how he became a college guy.
All right. Well, I'll try to live up to that high praise there. Yeah. So I started off like a lot of kids. I was just a skinny kid that loved to play baseball. It's probably 6 foot, 160 pounds. I threw in the 70s. I'd always been pretty good for my area. I grew up in rural Tennessee, small town, so I was good for my town, and always thought that would kind of carry me. But I got into high school. We were always a pretty decent team, for our area. Nothing crazy, but there were no guys on any of my teams that ever played college baseball. No guys that for sure ever played pro baseball. So for me, I always had an expectation that I would keep playing because I loved the game, and you just never really expect it to stop, and not having an understanding of what the system was to get to the next level. I just expected it to happen. I think a lot of times we think someone's going to come and pick us out, like they're going to choose us, and we're going to be, put on some sort of conveyor belt, and it's going to just take care of everything for you. And I was definitely of that mindset. I thought, well, it'll happen somehow. And I remember after my junior year, I was still just like I'd say average for my area. Definitely not average nowadays, but average high school player. And the guys that were ahead of me had always been better than me, the senior class after my junior year. And, our season finished. We didn't really play that great. We didn't really go to the playoffs or anything. And none of them were going to college to play. And it kind of hit me at that moment where I realized like these guys were the best players I had ever played with. And none of them were going on to play at the next level. And so I realized like if something was going to happen, I was going to have to take action quickly. And I was fortunate to be born in the time period that I was. I was an 2004 high school graduate, and Google had launched in 2000. And so I Googled like, how do you play college baseball? I had nowhere to go. I didn't know who to ask. And so I Googled it, and basically the best I could come up with was just to start writing letters. Mm-hmm. So I mailed letters to every D1 baseball coach in the country because D1 was all I knew. That was like, okay, that's where baseball is. I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea about Division II or NAIA or any of that really. So I sent out a ton of letters and really didn't get anything back except for generic, thanks for sending your stuff.
Come to our camp, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And that was part of it. And a couple of them definitely got me to come to their camps. It kind of started the process though, taking ownership and saying, all right, no one's going to do this for me. I need to start figuring out what to do and being comfortable making mistakes. Not afraid to look stupid. I can't imagine what some of the coaches thought getting the letters that I sent, which were really just me typing up on a blank sheet of paper my stats and my height and stuff like that and sending it on. And I was very fortunate to ask around, and there was, at the time, travel ball wasn't what it is now. It was a totally different world. And but there was one select team in the area. And this was my senior year, and I had the opportunity to play with them in the fall. And it really seemed like it was kind of a favor to my coach. I kind of asked my coach if he could see if he could work something. And they said I could come and play, but I was basically a backup second baseman on this select ball team, which at the time I just thought it was cool to be playing select ball. But now looking back, I'm like, man, I was really low on the totem pole. I was a backup utility infielder on a travel ball team.
I guess it's better than being the backup second baseman nowadays when every team is a select team.
Right. For sure. But actually, one of the coaches who I'd sent a letter to, I did send a couple letters to local like JUCOs and NAIAs, and one of them had come out to watch somebody else actually on the team. There was another player who ended up signing at a D1, and they'd come to see him. And, they came up and said hi to me because I had sent them a letter, and they're like, hey, that kind of thing. So I played second. And as I was playing second, I would kind of showboat it on infield stuff and kind of flip the ball over from second base sidearm and try to look cool and, show out, that kind of thing. And that actually ended up being a really, at the time, I think my parents would have said, like, don't do that. You look like, I'd probably say that to my kid too. But it ended up being a huge blessing because the coach saw me throwing from the side and eventually would go on to recommend that I try to pitch sidearm. And he had told me that before they even offered me a scholarship or anything. He had said, I don't really have a place for you as a hitter. And at the time I was primarily a hitter. I thought anyway, I thought that was going to be my thing, because I wasn't that great of a pitcher. But he said, you should try to work on this. You kind of have a natural action with your arm from the side. So he's like, if you're going to do anything, it's probably going to be something like that. And I ended up getting an opportunity to go to a junior college. They didn't tell me this at the time, but it was to be like on the JV team. They brought in like 50 guys a year and just go battle it out. And, I went and I had the opportunity to continue to work, and that's really what I needed. I didn't know at the time, when you're young, you don't realize, hey, you probably need a ton of work to get to where you want to be. But I was very fortunate to get that opportunity, to have a coach that saw something in me that could set me apart. And, I went from being a 6 foot, 160 pound right-hander throwing 70 something to 6 foot, 160 pound throwing, in the 80s. And that made a big jump, pretty quick, and allowed me to continue to develop. So it was very fortunate, very lucky. A lot of the things that happened along the way were, I couldn't have scripted them. But I will say, just that commitment to, like, all right, I'm going to work, I'm going to take ownership of this, and continue to just try to put myself in a decent position. It's amazing what can happen when you just make that kind of commitment and put yourself out there.
The one question I had for you that maybe I never asked is, so you kind of stumble onto this by accident, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know Sidearm Nation is kind of like, it's like the Knuckleballers Club. Like, everybody watches out for each other. And, you and C-Shek became buddies over the years. And I'm sure you've talked to a million other guys. Like, where do you find mentorship like that? When you go to a junior college and, you ultimately obviously wound up finding success. You went to the Cape, you transferred to a Division I program, or, drafted pretty high. Like, where does the development come as a sidearmer? Like, what are the resources that are available to you?
It's funny. So the coach who saw me throw the first time from the side like that, he had come with the pitching coach from the junior college, and the pitching coach was pretty much the recruiter who I talked to for the most part. So I was planning on working with him when I got there, but he ended up taking another position at a Division I school, and we didn't have a pitching coach when I got to college. I didn't have a pitching coach my first 2 years of college, and I didn't have a pitching coach to help me, figure things out as a sidearmer. So I ended up watching a lot of just like whatever footage I could find on the internet, which was a lot of Dennis Eckersley, honestly.
Yeah.
They're just, at the time, YouTube wasn't stocked full of millions and millions of videos of baseball and all kinds of stuff. So I looked for what I could, but I think in the end, it was really a big blessing because it allowed me to just tinker. There was no one telling me like, this is right or this is wrong. It was very much, external cues. It was, we're going to set the catcher up here and like figure out how to hit this spot, like get to know your body, figure out how to like execute. Doesn't really matter how you get there. Put yourself in good athletic positions and just go pitch, go play. And I think that at that time where I was having to figure something out from scratch, at first I was really nervous. I was like, we have no pitching coach. How am I supposed to figure this out? But it provided a lot of freedom to play with stuff and figure out how to make it work. And I was really unorthodox coming out of college, but that's really what set me apart. It ended up being a strength And I think that's hard to do. You don't see that kind of freedom a lot of times especially at the college level. I think there's a tendency to, this is what we do, this is our method, this is what you're going to do, which obviously works for a lot of guys. But for me, I think having that freedom really set me up for long-term success, especially in pro ball, where you have to be your own pitching coach to an extent.
I think people completely overlook the fact that some of the best pitchers on the planet actually never had pitching coaches. I mean, for you until what, you were 21, third year of college, give or take?
Yeah. So when I got to, I got to Mercer after 2 years of JUCO. I got there and I felt like I had a pretty strong idea of what I needed to do to succeed. I'd seen a lot of growth. I'd seen, a lot of success in a short amount of time. And so knowing that I was probably, going to be there for a year, I felt very confident in what I was doing, that I knew what I needed to do. And so, we had a pitching coach there and he was very supportive, but I think he realized that too, that, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. And that was a huge lesson going into pro ball as well. Like having that confidence and understanding what your routine is, what you need to succeed. People recognize that pretty quickly, especially people that know what they're doing. And there's a lot of value in that in a lot of different ways. But it was definitely something, going back to your earlier point, like kind of happened by accident. But the more, the older you get and the more you're around smart people, that's probably a system you'd want to set up, like creating a situation where players have more freedom, have to take more ownership of what they're doing. I think you stand to gain a lot more than you stand to lose by empowering athletes that way.
I think and I've touched on this in maybe some previous podcasts, is, we talk about pitching coach too much. Kevin Romano is a good friend of mine who was at Kennesaw State for a long time. It was right down the street from you, actually. And Kevin always talked about, like, I feel like I'm more of a manager of pitchers than I'm a pitching coach. It's so much the time where, we're seeing these guys who are, in the top 1%, where, mechanics are pretty heavily debated. What keeps guys healthy, what allows them to perform at the highest level? How do you balance being funky and deceptive with being maybe biomechanically efficient? When in doubt, sometimes physically prepare guys, teach them how to compete, teach them how to attack certain hitters, give them good scouting reports. Like it's so much more about just managing who they already are in the context of whatever situation they're thrown into. Meanwhile, we see so many people that just try to go in and overhaul, people when they're weird. So we try to conform them to the average. Did you run into that at any point? Like people who did try to, adjust what you had kind of discovered worked for you naturally?
Yeah, it was one of the biggest challenges I had going into pro ball, actually, which I think I'd initially expected less hands-on approaches in professional baseball, and it ended up being kind of the opposite. I think the amount of freedom that I had in college really conflicted with what I experienced getting into professional baseball. Actually, I never threw before I'd even thrown a pitch in professional baseball. They changed my delivery, so that was a big challenge, and I struggled right away with it. And I think there's something to be said for having a long-term vision for a player's career and recognizing certain things that maybe are red flags, and they're going to go through some struggles before they have success with it. I understand that's part of it, but I also think you have to allow players to succeed and fail kind of on their own merits for a bit, if for no other reason to really generate buy-in when you do make those adjustments. And that was something that I struggled with. My first bullpen in professional baseball, they said, hey, we're going to change all these things. And, that was really a shock to me. And then that led to some really difficult, I think I had like a 20 ERA or something like that my first month of pro ball. And that was its own set of, psychological struggles where you're kind of deep in it right away. But, that was a lesson I needed to learn, and if I had to learn, and I'm thankful that I learned it in rookie ball and, that it wasn't in the big leagues the first time that happened. So I think you're right, though. The things that set players apart, you don't want to lose that, because the further you get into the game, the more you realize, like, those are the things that create elite players. You're trying to stay away from the average. You're trying to stay away from that middle ground. So, if I was coaching a player, I really would, and the best coaches I've been around have given players more space, not less. And when the timing is there to have those conversations, they do an excellent job. I think being a great communicator and understanding human psychology is massively important. And to your point about Kevin, I think when we call pitching coaches, there is a sense that they need to be very hands-on, that they need to be actively doing something, or else they're not doing their job. And reframing it as more of a manager of the staff or something like that really creates more of a passive presentation to the role. And I think that tends to be beneficial. You have elite athletes, allow them to be athletes, be there to provide guidance. But I think less tinkering usually leads to better results in the long run.
I'm curious because you obviously have experienced this, and you're extremely coachable. Like that's your personality. You're also like a great communicator. Like you've obviously been involved with union initiatives, and you spend a lot of time talking to minor leaguers. I'm curious, as you've gone through this path, have you developed almost like a for lack of a better term, maybe an algorithm for how players can attack this in their career? You know what I mean? When the feedback comes along that they may not necessarily agree with, like what's the avenue for a kid in low A or first year college player just doesn't agree with a plan? Like, do you think there's a right course of action for addressing that conflict before it becomes something that could, in their eyes, deter their career in the wrong direction?
Yeah, well, I definitely think first and foremost, you need to have an idea of what you're doing to begin with. I think having a plan before you walk in the door is really important, and it sets a tone for how you're perceived. I know a lot of guys who are really hard workers, and they do tons of dry drills. They're in the mirror all the time, stuff like that. And there's an element of that I understand, where you're working hard, and that's important, and you want people to see you working hard. But it can also present a situation, and I can understand this from a coaching standpoint, where it might look like you're searching.
Yeah.
And that's an invitation a lot of times for coaches to engage. And so you really have to balance that, and communicating that you have a method, that this is part of your approach is different as well. So I think having an open line of communication with coaches is really important. If for no other reason, that they recognize that you know what you're doing and you're thoughtful, and you have a plan. Second, I would say, I don't think there are any coaches out there that are looking to do harm. I think coaches are there because they want to help. They want to see guys succeed at every level. And recognizing that and taking that into any conversation. I think it's easy for players to be defensive. I think it's easy to, want to say like, hey, quit messing with me, that kind of thing. But I think it's equally important to recognize it's possible for everybody to win, and to work together to get to where we want to be. And so I've never told a coach, like, I don't want to hear it. I've never said, save it, I've got this, that kind of thing. I'm always open to learning. I think you have to be open-minded. You have to be looking for opportunities to get better. But I also think you have to verify those things. You can't just take it at face value either and assume, well, they said it, they're an authority, so I better do it. I'm willing to try stuff. I'm willing to consider things. But at the end of the day, it's your career. You're the one who has to go out there and play. And so you can recognize their, addition to what you're doing. You can recognize that they're adding value. And I think that goes back to communication. Having great dialogue and being a great communicator is a fantastic attribute to have both ways, both as a coach and as a player. And the more of that there is, I think the less tension there tends to be. And I think that's always the best place to start. So I would always encourage guys, communicate with your coaches, let there be an understanding, but go into the plan so that they know that you're on top of it, that they don't have to worry about you, because they do. That's a huge part for any coach, especially in pro ball. They want to know if you're dealing with a rookie ball coach, for him to give the okay for you to go to the next level. It's important that you're getting their stamp of approval, and your process is a part of that. If you show up and it looks like you don't know what you're doing, it reflects on them. And so, and that's a good thing. I think you want that kind of accountability from coaches. So
I always say, like, I want athletes to ask the why. I think I should be able to easily and quickly justify everything that I throw in a program. And if I can't do that, it shouldn't be in there. And we have even more, gadgets, whether it's like true objective measures, things like Hawkeye and Rapsodo and TrackMan, all these different, identifying things. And then we certainly we have video that, brings up maybe a small level of that objectivity, but, maybe more, high quality subjective feedback. Like all those that are at our fingertips. So it should make it easier for coaches. I think the ones we need to be really careful of are like the coaches that are just like, just do it because I said so. Like that's not, the athlete has to have a relationship and like a buy-in in the process that makes it more advantageous for everybody.
I think it's one of the great things about where the game's at now too, like the addition of this technology, being able to verify those things, you can see it, and I think this generation is so much better about having those kind of conversations where, because they're comfortable with the technology, there was a time when I first got into pro ball, that's what it was. Like it was one person's opinion versus the other person's opinion. And if it worked on the field, then it was right. And we know now that that's not really a great recipe for long-term success. And so, the addition of technology, data capture kind of opportunities in training and on the field, it just really changes the ability to have those kind of conversations, because it matters less about who's the authority figure and who's the athlete, and more about who understands this. And so I would encourage guys as well, like, be educated on these things. Like, this is not going anywhere. And if you want to see growth and you want to have smooth conversations and good relationships, like, you have to be able to speak the same language and be on the same wavelength. And that's a part of it, and it just takes some time and effort on both sides. There's still coaches that aren't interested in, that conversation. And, that makes for a tough environment. But I don't think it's the overwhelming majority of coaches nowadays, especially at the college and pro level.
So in spite of the 20 ERA you mentioned in rookie ball, things worked out well, and you moved from minor league baseball relatively quickly. Did the fall league thing on the way, and you get to the big leagues. So I'm curious, what were the biggest adjustments for you? Was it physical? Was it approach? Pitching in the big leagues on a regular basis. How was it different than what you had experienced in the minor leagues?
I think one of the bigger challenges for me was just the nature of being a young guy in the big leagues in terms of transactions and things like that. As you climb through the minor leagues, and I was very fortunate, I was never really demoted in the minor leagues. One step at a time. I was very fortunate in that respect. But getting to the big leagues and then doing the back and forth was a really a tough experience for me personally. And that was a lot about the mental game and just the confidence that's required to compete at that level. In spite of those kinds of transactions, which a lot of times have nothing to do with performance or talent or anything like that. They're about winning, and they have to cover innings, and they need certain kinds of arms, and there's contracts involved. Like, it's just a totally different thing than at lower levels, and especially in college. So that for me was a big challenge. But also, the game adjusts a lot quicker in the big leagues. So, I was a sinker slider guy coming up through the minor leagues. You may face the same guys a couple times in a season, but video wasn't getting around. They didn't have reports on you. So you could really lean on your strengths and get away with a lot. The big leagues is not that. You can get away with leaning on your strengths for a while, but especially now, the reports come in so quick. They know what you did in the minors. They know everything about you. And so, you really have to become more of a complete pitcher there. And it was one of the things that I was really thankful for. I had people around me that were able to, give me some guidance and talk to me about, those kind of adjustments and what it was to be a pro. Coming up through the minor leagues, I never watched video. I never looked at, scouting reports, anything like that. It was very much like, here's my best stuff, come and get it, and, go from there. And, when you're facing the same team 7 times in 10 days or something like that,
Yeah.
and you're facing the same hitters, that's the other thing. In the minor leagues, you're facing just different guys, like wherever the part of the lineup. Big leagues, they're matching you up against certain guys, and that may be somebody you face 5 times in a season. It's you're going to know each other by the end of the year, especially if you're a starter, especially as a starter. But that was a big adjustment for me, just learning. I feel like I had a pretty good grasp on what it took to be successful in the minor leagues. But at the major league level, it was just another step, another level of commitment, time, energy, and really engaging that like mental side of the game, and being prepared on the field, because that's what the best guys were doing. And things that seemed random when I was a rookie, by the time, I was a couple years in, I was like, that's of course that's what was going to happen. It just, you see the patterns, you see how the game develops. And that's actually the funnest part. I feel like that's when it's not so much about just execution and you're able to compete and the game is moving at a different speed. That was my favorite part of, pitching in the big leagues for sure.
What about the adjustment to like just a higher workload? In the minor leagues, everything is very predictable. Maybe you throw every other day, maybe you throw every third day. You get to the big leagues and they use you a lot more, right? You might have back-to-back. I mean, you've thrown both halves of a doubleheader before, and you were banged up, earlier in your career. And as time progressed on, you were like consistently a 60+ appearances guy, in the big leagues. I think it was like 3 years in a row. What was it just an approach to, how you manage your bullets and throwing? Was it, the ability to not, use all your bullets in the bullpen and then, maybe not go in a game? What were some of the big lessons that you learned that allowed you to carry a higher workload?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was realizing, that just the amount of throwing you're going to be doing over that long of a season and that many games. And, as a reliever, your goal is to get in as many games as you can. That was something I always took pride in. I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to pitch in as many games as I could. And I knew, I came up with Atlanta, and in Atlanta from 2010 to 2014, which is about the window I was there, our best guys out of the bullpen were throwing 75, 80 times a year. That's just how they use that bullpen. So I recognized that I had to be ready for that kind of thing. And, pretty early on, we met each other pretty early in my career. And one of the things that I remember you talking to me about was, adding mass and just recognizing like, hey, the workload that we're going to be taking on over a big league season, you really want a frame that can sustain that. And it'll help with maintaining velocity, a lot of other things. So for me, as a guy that was always really, lanky and pretty wiry, that was an important thing for me, was to get to a size that I knew not only could I make it through a season, but I could actually improve as the season got on. While other guys are trying to kind of control the fall, one of the things I always wanted to do was finish better than I started. And I knew that was going to take changing some things physically. So that was important to me. I did I had Tommy John in 2014, and that gave me an opportunity to really evaluate a lot of things about my delivery, about physically, how I was throwing, how I was carrying weight, things like that. And it really set me up to have a better second half of my career than first half. And, I wouldn't wish anyone to go through Tommy John, but I do feel like that period of time, and being in the big leagues when I had it, that was the other thing, allowed me to learn a lot, and be able to watch a lot of baseball in a way that I hadn't been able to before. And I really think it changed the trajectory of my career.
And you were one of those guys that, you kind of reshaped your arm path before it was cool to do so. Nowadays you see guys that, use a ton of camera stuff. They use, actually like constraint-based training, various ways to do it. Like, how hard was that to rewire it all? I remember, talking a bunch with Troy Jones about the work you guys did together to make it happen, and obviously put you in a good position. Like, was it a very involved process? Is it something that came pretty naturally simply because you had the time off for the Tommy John?
Yeah, I think the beauty of that whole process, working with Troy, working with you, different people, was a lot of the issues were, firing patterns, not necessarily like I needed to just change my arm angle or arm slot or whatever. Like I learned with being around people much smarter than me who could show me how it was happening. That I wasn't really using my body efficiently in the ways that it's supposed to get the most out of it, with as efficient effort as possible. And so recognizing and learning like, hey, this is actually how your body's supposed to move, made that process a lot easier for me. I wasn't fighting against myself, which was one of the reasons I feel like I had Tommy John in the first place is, I was kind of taking the path of least resistance in a lot of ways that wasn't setting myself up physically to be able to sustain the kind of workload that I was trying to take on. So really understanding how my body worked, how to put myself in the best possible position, it made a huge difference, but also having that process undertaken during a time where I wasn't really throwing, right? Like I was able to kind of retrain my body to like, hey, this is how we want to sequence this kinetically. And it really made the throwing process and that change a little bit easier because I had that level of understanding. So it definitely wasn't easy. It took time. I would say even after I started the throwing process in Tommy John, it probably took me 6 or 7 months to feel like, okay, I feel like I have a decent grasp on this new slot. But
I was actually going to ask you as a follow-up to that. So you were a spring training Tommy John. It happened, kind of like a high workload in spring training one year. And one of the things that we know is that, it takes, depending on the study you look at, they say it's like 18 months for that tendon to become a ligament, right? And I've always said that guys that have spring training Tommy Johns have it way tougher when they make their return than guys who have it at the end of the season. Because you have it at the end of the season, that like kind of 12 to 18 month range, it's like a slow on ramp to the next season. Whereas if you have it in the spring, you're racing back. You want to be ready maybe for opening the next year if you're inside of 12 months. But in reality, you're kind of just feeling out. And we saw several of those guys in Major League Baseball, last year, that were spring training Tommy Johns that kind of like struggled to find it, at the 14-month mark, give or take. What was your experience like when you came back that following spring training? Like, did it take time for you to find? I'd say your old self, but I know it was a new delivery. So, what was your experience?
Yeah, it was really strange. I think you're spot on with that interpretation. That's exactly how it was. It happened the last game. It was getaway day for opening day. The last game of spring training blew out and missed that whole season. And then the following spring, there was a bit of a rush to get going for sure on my end. I wanted to get going as much as the organization, but I was really fortunate to, after Tommy John, I went from Atlanta to San Francisco. They had picked me up, and they just did a great job. Honestly, they weren't rushing at all. They had a plan, they had a timeline. I was definitely ready to go. I think most professional athletes or competitors have that kind of itch. It's much harder to pump the brakes than press the gas, which I think is all of our initial instinct. But they really took their time, and I had some success early. I broke camp a couple weeks late after spring training, so I was probably 13 months ish around by the time they sent me out to an affiliate, and they took their time with it. And I had some success early, but I definitely wasn't myself. And I'm thankful for their patience and understanding, more so than my own, because I was chomping at the bit. I was ready to get back pitching, get back in the big leagues, and they really let me develop and kind of work out a lot of those kinks that like we talked about earlier. A lot of times you think if you're having success on the field that's all that matters. But I definitely wasn't ready yet. To your point, it hadn't fully gotten back to what I was. But I would say by August of that year, which is kind of in that 17-month range.
Mm-hmm.
I felt as good as I've ever felt, and that's when I got my opportunity to get back to the big leagues, and the timing was right, and I'm thankful for that, because timing is as important as anything in professional baseball. And and then I pitched for another month, and then got to shut it down and rest it. So in that way, it worked out really well. But you're definitely right, having that. And I know several guys who had those spring training Tommy Johns and ended up blowing out again the next year. It just it's really tough, both because of the psychological element of it and just the timing, the calendar. Presents kind of a tricky situation for teams and players.
I think we saw it even more pronounced in kind of the COVID era, where some guys even had, hiccups along the way and rehab experience. It wasn't just a consistent, 14 months to get to that normal return to time period. So it'll be interesting to see if some of this kind of normalizes in the years ahead as the world gets a little bit more back to normal. But
yeah, I've got Dr. Allcheck to thank too. I saw you had him on.
He's great. That's right. I'd forgotten he had done yours. So maybe kind of building on the previous discussion, like I know you were always known for your slider, and you're kind of came up before we had all these analytics that tell us what a great slider is. How some sliders are different than others. Looking at basically guys that have gyro versus guys that don't. So I'm curious. Your slider when you came up was very different, right? It was very big. It was sweeping in 2011 when you first came up, and then it got kind of tighter and tighter as the years went on. And I know this change in a lot of ways kind of like paralleled the rise in your vertical release height, as you kind of did bring your arm action up just a little bit. Was it intentional? Was it secondary to adjustments to your delivery? Was it related to kind of the injuries and how you approach the slider? Like what made it so different 7 or 8 years in?
I think one of the things for sure later in my career, as I got a higher arm slot and got a little more upright with my delivery, it definitely had an impact. But I also think cycles in the game in terms of what pitches are in and what pitches are not, and what pitch profiles teams want to see, had an impact as well. At the time when I first came up, cutters were really big. So they wanted like shorter, less action that you can see. That was definitely like something I heard a lot. Like we want it short and like catching the plate a bit, but we don't want this big sweepy thing.
Yeah.
Now people would say that's crazy. You want the big sweepy thing. And so some of that you just can't help. It's at a certain point as a player, you have to figure out like, okay, well, this is what they want. And so how do I develop that? But another thing I'll say is early in my career, I really hadn't developed a changeup. I didn't have a feel for a changeup at all until I would say probably my 4th or 5th year in the big leagues. And I think that played a factor as well. Just trying to open up the whole zone, especially with lefties. That was something I always heard was, sidearm righties, everyone says, oh, they can't get out lefties. So it was a huge thing for me to develop that pitch and have it in my arsenal for against lefties. And I think it took away a little bit just because of, a ton of pronation, just cranking a lot. It's really hard to maintain that kind of spread on your pitches, to have something with a ton of run to the arm side and super sweepy. So I think it was a combination of those things, but to an extent there was intent behind it, trying to shorten it up so that I wasn't losing stuff off the plate. I think that goes back to your point about the league adjusting as well. The way I used it was probably not as beneficial as it could have been. And so because of how much action it got in sweep, eventually people were laying off of it a lot. And so I kind of had to get back on the plate a little bit more to make it effective. And that definitely played some role in it. But I think the higher my arm slot and release point got, it just made it a little bit more challenging to get that same sweep. But it opened up some doors in other ways. My fastball improved, my changeup improved a lot. So it's, kind of a catch-22, but yeah.
Did you manipulate your slider differently? Was it a grip it and rip it? Were you trying to, you hear from, a bunch of different people, everybody kind of has a different approach on what they're trying to do with it. Some can explain it, some can't. What was your mindset?
Yeah, initially it was definitely grip it and rip it. I remember when I first developed it, my whole approach was I kind of had an unorthodox grip because of my arm slot stuff, and that goes back to just having the freedom to kind of play with stuff and see what worked. But it was very much just like aim at the right-handed hitter's hip and just rip it as hard as you can and see what you can make happen. The more I got into the big leagues and it wasn't something that I used in that way as much, I did start manipulating a little bit different to get some of that shorter action, to get a little more depth on it, and not just like that straight horizontal kind of sweep. But at different points, different pitching coaches and stuff, you heard, towards the end of my career, definitely with the Yankees, they were much more like, hey, sweep. We want the big, arm action kind of thing, as opposed to, the shorter, finer thing. So I know a lot of guys do different stuff, and I think at different periods, I used it different ways. Probably had the most success with just the grip it and rip it approach. But it helped at times too, being able to use it different ways and having different profiles. But
I mentioned that you're a super open-minded guy, and you've already kind of alluded to maybe how the injuries shaped you in different ways, being exposed to different organizations. Like, are there any experiences that or maybe innovations that that jump out in your mind as having helped you evolve the most over the course of your career as you went through different experiences?
I mean, definitely towards the second half of my career, where we did have more access to data capturing technologies, things like that, high-speed cameras where you can actually see what's happening. I mean, that really opened my eyes to some of the things that I thought I knew about what I was doing that were not the case. I always think that's really beneficial, just to have that understanding so that you can build off of it. It makes it a lot easier to make adjustments when you actually know what adjustments you need to make and you're not just guessing. But I think, for me, early in my career, a lot of the things I developed were just, I tried it and it worked. And so I was just going to keep writing that. And what made a big difference beyond on-field stuff, and I think this is a huge part, definitely being a professional, but I would encourage every level of athlete to be mindful of, is the things that go into improving your overall condition that allow you to build on the field. So when I first came into pro ball, I'd never really considered anything with my diet, with my sleep, mental skills, anything like that. Those are an incredibly important part of putting yourself in a position to be successful, both in the short term and the long term. But for sure, if you want to have any kind of sustained success, if you're competing against people that are nailing those things and you're not, it's just an uphill battle. And so you can really set yourself apart in that way. And I was fortunate to learn a lot of those things, which to me were massive innovations in terms of my career, gaining that kind of understanding and learning, hey, these are some small things that are kind of low-hanging fruit that you can set yourself apart, both in real terms, but also in the eyes of an organization. If you're attacking these kind of things and you're representing yourself as a professional, as someone who's like taking it seriously, that comes through. People recognize those things, and that's I wouldn't say as big a part as anything you're doing on the field, but it's a big part. Being a professional, having that kind of foundation, there's a reason that teams are providing those kinds of resources. And they want guys that are taking advantage of it. So that was a huge deal for me. So early on, I didn't have as much opportunity to work with Rapso. There just wasn't there. Like you capture stuff, like it was still old school video and things like that. But definitely later on in my career, and I think moving forward, it's just such an advantage for players. I would just encourage everyone to become as much of an expert in those fields so that you can just improve at a much quicker rate.
Be an advocate for yourself so you can ask for what you need.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're, I'd also say this, if you're a player that knows what's out there, if you know the technology and you understand it, and you go to your organization or you go to your college coach and you say like, hey, this is out there and we can get better. Like, is this something that we can access to? Like, even if the answer is no, those are wins. That's a win conversation for any athlete who's advocating for themselves and their teammates to improve the program to improve their level of play. It's just a can't miss. There's nothing you're going to do that's going to set you back by taking ownership in that way, learning, and having those kind of conversations.
I always love interviewing guys who are recently retired because are you officially retired, by the way?
Yeah.
All right. It's done deal. Okay. So, because they're always super honest about how hard the game is, right? So they're usually willing to give away their secrets. Like, who are a few hitters that you never could seem to get out, and why?
Well, yeah. First of all, I'll just say the game is really hard, and that was always something that bothered me. For sure, like on broadcasts, I think they're the worst. The worst that I've seen in terms of being like, oh, just come on, throw a strike. Like it's okay, you know. So I'll give you a lefty and a right. I'll try to give fair credit to both sides. For me, for sure, and these are two different kind of hitters, but obviously great. As from the left side, Chase Utley, I don't think I ever got him out. I mean, I think I was 0-2 on him on almost every AB. He just battled, like he was so patient. He was so short to the ball. He just like battled and battled and battled. And he either fouled it off until he got a pitch to hit and then got a hit, just fought me until I made a mistake, or he fought me off until I walked it. Like it's just, and I played against him pretty much my entire career, you know, and I don't think I ever got him out. And it was always the most frustrating at bat too, because you have him and he's not trying to do too much. He just takes what you give him and he's going to spoil everything. And he's also like so prepared that he knows basically what's coming. Like some of the pitches, you're like, how did he do that? But he was just a really tough out for me. And then a guy from the right side, I don't know if I ever got Miguel Cabrera out either, maybe once. And I think he hit it hard every time I faced him. But they both have like these short inside out kind of swings that just, for what I kind of brought to the table, sinker slider, it just really made it a challenging AB. Especially early in my career when I wasn't like elevating as much, everything was like down and they could see it. And so those two guys, those are tough. I mean, those are great players, but those are two guys that for sure had my number. But I don't mind that. Those are two guys that I think will
I was going to say, those are, if you're going to give them up, that's explained. Yeah. What about the other end of the spectrum? Who are guys that, you know, you did well against that, you know, you would have thought you would have struggled against, who are, you know, really advanced hitters that for some reason, let's say you had their number, but you had a good approach against them?
So from the left side, I'll use a name just because he's a buddy of mine. Charlie Blackmon, who I played college baseball with. This is one of my sources of pride for my major league career. I faced him 3 times. He's 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts. So that was not that was like a guy that I just had his number, but he's my boy, so I gotta throw him under the bus a little bit. But so Charlie's my guy from the left side, and then another guy who I always like to have trained with and stuff, but I always just had good ABs against, Xander Bogaerts, who's just an incredible hitter, especially from the right side, and in Fenway just is a tough out. But I always had really good success with him, especially with my slider. I just think it kind of matched up well for his swing plane. And but great dude. I love X. He's awesome. But he was a guy I would say from the right side. Still not. Neither of those were easy at bat. Like never. I don't recall too many super easy at bats, except for maybe some pitchers that walked in the box. But I always just seem to have some success with those guys.
Nice. I'm curious. You're obviously super involved in baseball across a number of disciplines. I know you're kind of like getting into this consulting realm with, you know, young players and parents who are trying to map out their, you know, their baseball destinations and all that. Like, what do you like about the direction of, you know, the game of baseball? Like, you know, what frustrates you? Like, where do you think we can maybe do better as an industry to prepare the, you know, the players of tomorrow?
That's a tough question today of all days. And they just announced they were canceling games, so that's never good. You know, that's a different conversation about kind of the economics and big picture of baseball. But I feel like there's a ton to be excited about in baseball. Besides all the conversations you hear, you know, kind of on TV about, you know, the direction the game's going from the commissioner's office and owners and stuff like that. I think there's more talent on the field than there ever has been. It blows my mind every day. Young guys that are coming up, what they're able to do, what they bring to the plate. Like physically, there's just never been a better time in baseball. Like I refuse to believe anyone who says otherwise. And I think that's really exciting. I think what we're able to do, the rate at which we're able to help players, tightening those feedback loops, using data, technology, like motion capture stuff. It's easy to see why we're making the strides that we're making in terms of player development, the level of play. So I think
it's crazy. We're seeing like Cory Gearrin's throwing 100 with wipeout sliders.
Yeah, I mean that's
from that slot. You know,
it's incredible.
2011, you were one of 2 or 3 guys that could do what you did. You know.
Yeah, yeah. When I came up, I've talked to lots of people from different organizations now in front offices and stuff, and I've had the luxury of having some conversations about like, hey, what did you think about me when I first came? You know, those kind of things. And, you know, I was throwing low 90s. I was throwing 92, 93 with a lot of movement. And at the time they were like, dude, you were like one of 2 or 3 guys that were doing that in the game. Like, that's pretty crazy. Now, what my stuff is like, I hope you can break in, you know, like it's insane. You know, you know, we both know Blake Trine. I trained with Blake. I've known Blake for a long time. That guy's kind of stuff is incredible. And there are multiple of his kind of thing, you know, out there. Like it's not even that insane now. And you know, watching him play, like this is the best stuff on the planet. There's no way anyone else can be close. And guys are figuring it out. And facilities are doing a great job. Coaching staffs are doing a great job of helping players figure out how to get the most out of their bodies. And I think that's incredibly exciting. And so players today at every level have as good an opportunity as anyone ever has at developing whatever innate ability they have and building on that in a tremendous way. So that's what's exciting about the game. I will say some of the things that I think are challenging moving forward. You know, I think the way the game is being incentivized to be played in a lot of ways is creating some challenges just for like the product of games, what games do look like because of what I think is kind of a system of incentivization that is kind of done in the shadows. I don't think players understand and what they should be chasing necessarily. And I think that's part of what's happening right now. And in this lockout is there's been a disconnect between what players historically thought they were getting paid to do and what kind of results they should be chasing and how they were going to get paid in free agency and in arbitration. And teams have definitely gotten smarter. They've learned a lot. It goes back to what we're talking about with data and understanding how to help players, understanding how to win games, things like that. But I think there's been a disconnect there. And honestly, before we started talking, I was, you know, on Instagram or something. I was watching a video where they were asking major league players like, hey, can you name this statistic? Like, what does XWOBA stand for? I mean, these are the faces of the game, and the guys had no clue, which is funny in a small clip, but it also reflects a disconnect between front offices and players in terms of like what's happening on the field and what needs to be produced. And, you know, I think guys are doing the best they can to both win games, play at a really high level, but also, you know, get compensated for the talent that they've developed. And so I think that's a challenge that I really hope they can figure out because the talent's there and there's no reason the game shouldn't be as compelling as it's ever been with the level of talent that is being played. But I think it goes back to open communication. I think there's just been a lack of communication between ownership, front offices, and players in terms of working together to put a great product on the field. And all the pieces are there. You have all the pieces. There just needs to be some cooperation, and that's baseball isn't the only area where there's not a great sense of cooperation going on in the world right now. But I think we can be an example, and baseball could be at its best across all levels, in my opinion.
What about even like transferring some of it to like the younger levels? Like I know I mean you've trained around, kids at our facility, and you've been at Exos, you've been around, advanced high school players. Like do you see problems in the way we've all seen the kid, right, that gives up an 8 spot and his team loses 10-9, and he's like, but I hit 95, and my four seam was at 2400 RPMs, like that kind of infatuation. Are there trends that you see maybe on the younger side, kids getting, whether it's desensitized to losing and maybe not even understanding like the team dynamic? Like, is that something that concerns you, particularly as you obviously get more involved with like younger populations in retirement? Like you're starting to see like a new generation of baseball.
Yeah, I think, this generation is no different than any other generation. Like my generation, all we had were radar guns, and that's what most guys wanted to know. Like it was, you're trying to, I think it's very human to try to look for a number or a statistic or something that you can identify, reduce it to its simplest form, and say, this is what I'm chasing, right? Front offices are doing the same thing. Players do the same thing. They're trying to figure out in a very simple way, what do I need to do to be successful? The challenge, I think, is a lot of times we focus on outcomes and results, like that's what we need to chase. And there's a lack of focus on process. And I think that's something we should be considerate of as we move forward, that while it's great to hit those numbers, it's great to gain that velocity, like having an understanding of what you're doing, how you got there, and being able to recognize wins that aren't reflected on the screen are also important. So that's one thing. When I talk to kids and I'm around when they see a Rapsodo or when they see any kind of number on a screen, I understand how compelling that is. It's what makes that technology great. I just also think there has to be some balance there between, hey, I know you want to see this number, but there are things we need to talk about first before you even are concerned with that, because there are improper ways to hit those numbers that are really going to, and I think that's one of the concerns that I have about young guys coming up. The last couple of years in the big leagues, like you see guys with incredible stuff, but you want them to have longevity. You want them to be able to do that for a really long time. As well as I do, like the output over a player's career looks a certain way. There's a certain trajectory historically. Front offices know this in terms of value, when they're going to start, letting players go, things like that. You want guys to be able to last as long as they can in the game, whether they're young players or older players. Like the goal is to play the game for as long as you can. I think anyway, that was always my goal. I was like, I want to play as long as I possibly can, and whatever happens in the meantime, like that's great. But playing baseball was my priority. And I think there are really important lessons in terms of your longevity and what it's going to take over time to maintain it, because your stuff is going to fall off. Like at some point, you're not going to throw 103. And maybe you can still throw upper 90s, but that's different than throwing 103. Like there is a difference. And so you have to learn how to manage that. And one of the big things I had to learn in baseball was, hey, if I want to stick around, it's not enough just to get a certain kind of guy out. I better be able to get out every kind of guy. So, I think the challenge is a lot of times now you see, especially in pro ball, hey, let's identify your best thing. And like, we're just going to do that over and over again. And I totally understand the rationale behind it, but I also think it's limiting to a guy's long-term potential in their career. And so I definitely understand why it's good for teams. I understand why it wins. I advocate for guys, I want guys to be able to play for a really long time. And I think we can be a little short-sighted when we don't pay attention to the finer details. And that was one of the things I always appreciated working with you, is there was that, let's understand this. Let's kind of get into the details and why is this going to work? To your earlier point, like understanding why, and not just, hey, you deadlifted 600. That's great. But like, you're not going to be able to do that for a month because I saw your form, like, you're going to blow your back out. Those things are important as well. So, and there are people that are doing a great job addressing that. I just think holistically, that's a conversation that I think we have to be mindful of moving forward.
No doubt. All right. We always wrap up with a lightning round. First question. You can be as short or long as you want. I don't know why we call it the lightning round, but who do you like to watch in today's game and why?
I think if you're watching baseball today and you're not excited to watch like a Shohei Ohtani, like you're crazy. It's just as rare a thing, I think, as I've seen.
Baseball's hard, and he does it on both sides.
I mean, what he does on both sides of the game is incredibly hard, and he does it as well as anyone on the planet. And so that's really special. I think, baseball is worth watching just to watch him. That's something you're going to, be able to talk about for a long time. But as far as pitcher only, though, I'd say DeGrom is still one of the most incredible things to watch. What he's able to do consistently and effortlessly, it seems like, is just phenomenal. He's a generational guy, obviously, but it's just fun to watch because you can just see the frustration on his face. Like he makes it look really easy.
Favorite teammate of all time and why?
I've had a lot of really, really good teammates. That's a hard one. I will say though, I've had some teammates that I would say make it a priority to be a great teammate that really stuck out to me. And I'd say Hunter Pence in San Francisco was the best I've seen in terms of every day coming in and recognizing that he had an opportunity to elevate the rest of the team just by being a good teammate. He did it for me for sure. I mean, he impacted my career in a big way in terms of like immediately feeling like a part of the group and being able to make an impact. So I'd have to say Hunter, just because of that really stood out to me. Not only was he a good teammate, but he prioritized it. It was a tool in his belt. I saw him have that same impact on lots of guys and on whole teams. I think guys like that create a culture. At least they have the opportunity to create a culture if they have teammates that have, buy in. And so that to me was always impressive, and I appreciated the opportunity to play with him and to witness that.
Nice. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'm curious if maybe succinctly you can say is like, what were the qualities of the best coaches that you've had over the years? Like, who helped you the most and why?
I'll say in terms of characteristics, for sure, communication. There's just no doubt in my mind, like great coaches or managers in any field are excellent communicators. Every manager that I had that I felt like did a great job was a top 5 communicator that I know, that kind of a person. I also think they didn't shy away from tough conversations. That was a part of the communication as well. It's like there are plenty of opportunities to sugarcoat things, to like just avoid saying something. And the best coaches and managers that I've ever played with made it very very easy to have those conversations. They didn't make it stressful. There was no like angst or anything like that. It was just very much like, hey, here's what's going on. Like, let's get it out in the open, talk about it. I always thought that was big, and that comes from having like an even keel. They are that kind of, they set the tone in the locker room, and they know when to engage and when to pull back. For me, I think I really appreciated Dave Righetti, who was my pitching coach in San Francisco when I first got there. He was one of the things I really appreciated about him, whether I had a good outing or bad outing. When I came off the field, the question wasn't about what was off or what was good. It was process related. It was, hey, what was your approach here? What were you thinking? It was much more about like what was going on in my approach, as opposed to like, hey, your arm was dragging, or hey, some mechanical fix, or like, or even just like, hey, that was brutal. Like that was never that. It was, hey, let's talk through your thinking. And that always, to me, one, it takes you out of that, whatever that struggle or success was. Like it automatically takes you out of the result and gets you back to that process conversation, which I think is the most important part.
Talking about some advice for a teenage Cory Gearrin.
Teenage Cory Gearrin?
Going back in time. Write emails instead of handwritten letters.
No, if I had to give one piece of advice, I'd let him keep writing the letters, and I'd tell him to buy Bitcoin when he was supposed to buy Bitcoin.
I'm still waiting for you to succinctly explain Bitcoin to me. You were the first person to try to explain it to me. This is circa what, maybe 2013, 14, something like that.
I think it was earlier than that. Yeah, I think it was like 12 or 13.
Yeah. 9 years later, I still don't know anything about it. So
it's okay. You're not alone.
I'm definitely not alone on that one. I think there was a Saturday Night Live skit about that, wasn't there?
No, I'd probably if I could go back and give myself some advice that I really think would be helpful long term, just for the road that's ahead. I'd probably say, like, don't focus on things that are out of your control. Mm-hmm. There's so many things that are in your control that you can get better at, that you can work on, and countless things that you think might happen, or that if you could do something, maybe you could influence. That just stay in your lane, focus on what you can focus on, really focus on developing excellence. Just become as much of a tool and as excellent as you can possibly be. And the other stuff takes care of itself. And just enjoy yourself. Like, you do that and go have fun and enjoy it, because none of the other stuff matters. Like, you can't do anything about it. So just go be great.
I know you're a guy who finds like quiet moments, and you're like a good cup of coffee guy. I remember you're training in Massachusetts one day. You just decided to like go drive to the White Mountains and explore all of New England on like a weekend. But I also know that leads into being like a voracious reader. So I'm sure you've got 9 books in works right now, but give me maybe a book recommendation for a young player, and then maybe a current professional player, like 2 that really spoke to you.
Okay, that's going to be tough. I don't know if I can give you just one, because
all right,
I don't even read one book at a time.
Yeah, you can do a brain dump if you want to. That's totally fine. Whatever your top picks are. Okay,
so for like a young guy, up and coming, high school or even college athlete, I would probably recommend. I always recommend The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I just think it's a great motivational story. It has nothing to do with baseball. It's about it's a fictional story about a kid in Spain that chases his dreams, basically. But always recommend that. It's a really quick read. But in terms of on the more sports side, this is actually one that you recommended to me, I think. Range by David Epstein. I think for young athletes and parents, I think it would honestly be a great read for a lot of parents. There's so much conversation about specialization and how important it is to. I mean, there are kids that are on travel ball teams that are 6 years old. They're going to be baseball only for the next 30 years if they can't. That kind of thing. That book really opened my eyes to a great conversation. I was fortunate I wasn't a specialized player until I got basically to college, but we've talked about this many times, the importance of having diversity of experience and talent to draw from. And so I'd recommend Range by David Epstein. And then Mind Gym is a very fundamental mental skills book that I read early on in my pro career that I think any level of athlete can read and would be beneficial. But I would recommend those 3 for young players for sure.
I like it. Well, your Twitter game is markedly improved over the last couple of weeks. A little more active. I know you've been taking like some Harvard classes. You've been involved in various initiatives. Like, what's next for Cory Gearrin? What's the next step for you?
So that's a good question. Yeah, I've definitely stepped up my Twitter game a little bit. I've been inspired by some Cressey family. Sahil,
Barrett and Neil, greatest host brother of all time.
Oh man, yeah, and Barrett, like my host family from up there, those guys are crushing it on Twitter. So I decided to jump in with them and just try to share a little bit about my experiences. And we've had a lot of stories and a lot of experiences over the years. So just sharing what I can, hopefully it helps people. But yeah, I'm in the Harvard Business School crossover program right now, which is a program for professional athletes that they bring in. Actually, Adam Ottavino's in it as well right now with me. So a couple slider guys just coming up to Harvard to do some work. But it's been really interesting just learning more about the business of sports and entertainment, and getting connected with people at the business school up there, and really just trying to open some doors for future opportunities. But one of the things I'm really most excited about, and you kind of touched on it earlier, I referenced kind of the travel ball situation. I'm looking at launching, it's essentially a consulting company that works with really individualizing, career paths for players and families of all ages. Conversations that I've had with people, both in the commissioner's office, at every level of baseball, recognize that there's a problem in the infrastructure of what's happening in baseball right now. I think, travel ball can be really beneficial, but I also think a lot of people are leaving baseball because it seems like the only path forward is by spending a lot of money and spending a lot of time traveling and having to focus on this one thing. And so a lot of people are just saying, well, I guess this isn't the sport for us. At every level, there's that recognition. And so having been someone who had an unorthodox path to the big leagues through baseball, and recognizing like, hey, this isn't a one size fits all. There isn't one way to get to the big leagues. For as many people are in the big leagues, there's a different path that they took to get there. I really want to advocate for the game and for players to have fun, this journey should be a lot of fun. And it shouldn't be stressful for families or for kids if it doesn't have to be. And so my goal is to really find people where they're at and say, maybe it is a good time for a kid to go play travel ball. Maybe they're at that place where it would be beneficial for them to go out and play a lot of games and get seen. But I would argue that most kids probably aren't in that position, that there's a lot more attention to development that needs to happen, that they need to go through a lot of the things that a lot of us went through, who made it to the highest level, just in terms of education, learning how to use your body. And that might be playing other sports. Yeah. It might be taking some time to, depending on where they're at in their journey, if they're a high school kid or college kid, it might mean, hey, you need to be training. You might need to be putting weight on, like going and playing 100 games a year isn't going to do you any favors. And so just having those conversations, coming alongside kids who might have been like I was, like I had no idea. I was just feeling my way through. And I think if the playing field had looked like it does back then as it does today, I might have been somebody who's like, well, I guess I need to go play 150 games a year, that kind of thing. And I just want to, really see the game grow. And I don't want to see anything deter anyone from playing baseball, because there's no one way to get to the big leagues. If you love it and you're willing to work, and you can work with, great people, you can find a way to be successful in the game. And you just need that guidance. And I wish I'd had it earlier, and I'd love to work with other people to help in that same way if I can.
If people are interested in learning more about that, is there a place they can contact you? Is Twitter the best avenue, or what's the best way to express interest if they are?
It's still kind of in development, but no Twitter handle yet. We're not chirping anybody on Twitter, but on Instagram, if you just want to go and give a follow or something on Instagram, we just launched it recently just to have kind of a space, but it's called Protocol Sports. Sweet. PROTOCALL. So it's something that I'm excited about. I think anybody who loves the game and wants to play, having somebody that they can talk to. And my goal is not just for like me to talk to people. I really want to connect people that are experts in the field and other pros who want to do the same thing in terms of having those conversations and helping people make decisions. And it may be connecting them with people like you or people around the game. Everyone's at a different point and can be helped in different ways, but having the people to help facilitate that, I think, is important. That's always been something that was advantageous for me. Knowing people like you who, know tons of just great people. It's a massive benefit and something that I think it's great to share that.
Well, it comes from the right place. You want to leave it better than you found it, which I respect.
Absolutely.
So, well, this is awesome, man. Thanks so much for doing this. It's good to catch up and hear what you're up to. We were long overdue for a catch up chat, so I'm glad we're able to do it for the masses to all listen in on and hopefully benefit from as well.
Absolutely, it's weird for me. I prefer usually be the one asking questions, and it's hard to be talking about myself this whole time. So maybe if I can, step up my game and be like you or Sahil and have like a podcast of my own, I'll get to have you on. I can just ask you questions for a while.
We'll do like a Men of CSP reunion podcast with Barrett and Tim Collins and all the guys.
That would be great.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for doing this, and we look forward to seeing all your adventures in the months and years ahead.
All right, I appreciate it, Eric.
You got it.